Shalom, here is Psalm 138 of David. I praise you with all my heart, sing a hymn to you before the divine beings. I bow toward your holy temple and praise your name for your steadfast love and faithfulness, because you have exalted your name, your word above all. When I called, you answered me, you inspired me with courage. All the kings of the earth shall praise you, O Lord, for they have heard the words you spoke. They shall sing of the ways of the Lord. Great is the majesty of the Lord. High though the Lord is, he sees the lowly. Lofty, he perceives from afar. Though I walk among enemies, you preserve me in the face of my foes. You extend your hand. With your right hand you deliver me. The Lord will settle accounts for me. O Lord, your steadfast love is eternal. Do not forsake the work of your hands. Once again, we have the theme of God's chesed, translated here as steadfast love, emphasized in this psalm in the fact that it is repeated twice. God's steadfast love, God's faithfulness. And in the psalm, the psalmist starts off by saying Le David of David, and in the psalm conjures up an image of a divine sovereign, a divine king, who is one who is put on a pedestal and who keeps his word and who is exalted because of his holy name. He keeps his word in the sense that he is faithful towards his creatures, that he listens to their prayers, that he sees the lowly from afar, from his lofty pedestal. God is always aware and cognizant of the lowly and the downtrodden in spirit. The king, in this case, the divine king, who is seen as an example to be followed and emulated by all earthly kings, is an image that the psalmist conjures up of the kind of king that David was. Of course, an earthly king David was, who had his own faults and foibles and failings. He was far from perfect, but he still knew how to set an example of a king who cared about his people and who wanted to follow, at least in most times of his life and in most circumstances, wanted to try his best to follow and to emulate God's ways. But if we're going to follow and emulate God's ways, then God's ways in themselves have to be faithful and emulatable. If we're putting God on a pedestal, then we have to be able to believe in a being who keeps his word and who is exalted by means of his perfect nature in the way that he is faithful and loving towards all of us. Would it only could be, if it only could be, that an earthly king or a president of a country, a political leader, could be placed on a pedestal in the same way as someone who keeps his word, someone who doesn't lie, someone who doesn't cheat, someone to whom we can look up, we average citizens, and say, boy, if we could only be that way, if we could only aspire to that kind of ethical, moral model. But unfortunately, we live in a world where many of our political leaders do not fall into this category. They fall way short, starting from the very top and going down the line in terms of our politicians. Deep disappointments. And instead of being able to look up to them and hold them on a pedestal, we see them for who they are. We see through the lies. We are able to penetrate that veneer, that facade that they put across of caring for us or caring for the lowly and downtrodden, when instead they only care about their own power, perpetuating their own power, and keeping those close to them whom they feel they can trust so that they can feel secure on their own pedestal of power. But that is not a pedestal that we look up to. Our Jewish values teach us that truth, compassion, steadfast love, keeping one's word, faithfulness, all of which are qualities that we attribute to God, are also characteristics that we look for in our leaders. If our leaders fall short and do not maintain those qualities, then because we live in a democracy, thank God, it is our privilege and our right to vote them out of office and to elect others who can do a better job and build that level of trust with us. In the long run, and really the bottom line, is that we look to God. We emulate God. We try to follow God's ways in our lives. And in the same way, we look to our leaders, whether it be political leaders, leaders in social circles, clergy, whoever. We look to them to be stand-ins, in a sense, for God on this earth. We look to them to be embodiments of the values that are taught, the values that are propagated by our faith and by the teachings of our scriptures. And if they can't follow the line, and if they can't succeed in embodying these sacred values, then it is up to us to put them aside and to replace them with those who will embody those values and not only talk about them in words, but live them out in their deeds, in their actions. We indeed live in a democracy and a political system that allows us the chance to have our say in whom we choose. And therefore, we need to make use of every available opportunity to lift up our voices, make our preferences known, and drive through the agenda of the values that we believe in, which are the values of mutual care, concern, compassion, faithfulness, and love. Thank you.